Hello everyone, I am Nikki with Fulfill Your Legacy.
Hey there, I'm Pastor Tim Breen from First Reformed Church here in beautiful Orange City, Iowa.
Yes, indeed. And you have a blog.
I have a blog called telosblog.com, and been posting some stuff on there lately and got more stuff to come in the hopper. So writing little devotionals and sort of prompts that you can share with your friends, use with a Bible study, taking just a few verses in the Bible and unpacking them together, kind of like what we're doing here with CORE40.
It's really good.
Yeah.
All right, so we are on CORE40, week 32. Oh my gosh, we're moving right along, but this is the mission of the church still.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this lesson then.
Well, we are looking at a passage from Luke chapter 14. And as I said in the reading guide there, Luke is a book of the Bible in which Jesus is portrayed with a special measure of compassion and love and mercy for people that the rest of society casts aside or doesn't care about. So in the ancient world, men are more important than women, but Jesus has a heart for women. Adults more important than children, yet God, through Jesus, reaches to little children. People of all nationalities, people of all income levels. And in this particular situation, we see a couple of really important truths about how the mission of the church goes beyond the obvious people and reaches to the people on the margins. And that God has this commitment to bring in as many as he can into the kingdom of God and into the community of God. And it's all set up here at, believe it or not, at the dinner table of a Pharisee, where Jesus is having, a noon meal, an evening meal, but a Sabbath meal with some Pharisees who are kind of his opponents a little bit. It says in the opening verse here that they're keeping a careful watch of Jesus. Jesus is very popular, but Jesus does not obey the same rules and logic that they do, so they keep a very close eye on him.
Yeah, you share 3 different stories. I really like all these parables. Share with us the lessons to be learned in each.
So with my Bible just open here, the first situation that happens is that there's a man who has this kind of abnormal long-term swelling, or dropsy it's called in some translations. And he's right in front of Jesus. So you almost can think that the Pharisees put him in front of Jesus as a test. But Jesus turns this test back on them and says, all right, Pharisees, what do you think? Should this man be healed on the Sabbath day, the day of rest, or should we just leave him be? And they don't say anything. And Jesus says, come on, guys, if you have an ox that falls into a pit, even if it's a Sabbath day, you have compassion on him. So why wouldn't you have compassion on this man who's been suffering for this long time? And so Jesus heals him, and he goes on his way. So then situation number 2 is this story about humility at the table, where in the ancient world there were kind of prized seats, sort of head of the table seats, and then there were foot of the table seats, and that the honored guests would sit at the head of the table and the less important folks at the foot of the table. And then there'd be this range of importance in between. And Jesus says there's lots of people who angle for those most important seats. But once in a while, then a late arriving guest who has more honor comes, and then the host comes and takes the guest who shouldn't be in the prime seat, leads him by the hand, and takes him to a lower seat. And everybody can see he's humiliated by this. And there's also these moments where someone comes and takes a seat at the end of the table, but should have higher priority seating. And in front of everyone watching, this person is exalted. And Jesus says, start at the low end, and you will be exalted. If you start at the high end, you'll be humiliated. And so Jesus wants his followers to know, and the church recognized part of its mission is to, in society or in acts of service, to humble yourself before other people. And it's just a very practical teaching of Jesus. Now the third teaching is very different, and maybe it's the most theological teaching. Because Jesus is talking about the great banquet feast in the kingdom of heaven. And there's this idea among Jewish people for years that the Messiah is going to have an enormous banquet. And that's going to be the sign that his kingdom has fully come. Like a king who's got an inauguration dinner and everyone's invited. And someone there at the table says, how blessed it will be to sit at the kingdom of God, to sit at this table. And Jesus says, well, let me tell you about that table. And he tells a parable about a man who's inviting all kinds of people to a party. You ever host a party, Nikki?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've had a few parties in your life, I'm sure. So have I. And it's the worst thing in the world when you throw this great party and you got decorations and you make a roast and everything is done with excellence and no one shows up. And so you've got food for 100 and you've got 17 people there. Well, Jesus says in this story that the man says, this is no good. We've got 100 seats and we got 17 people. So the man sends out a servant to the guests who've been invited, and they're all like, oh man, I'm so sorry. I can't make it. I just got a new car. I gotta try it out. Or, I'm supposed to go on a date tonight. I got reservations, going to the opera, can't come. All these lame excuses. So the servants come back and the master says, well, this is not good. I want you to go out because they said no and find anybody who's willing to come. Anybody who's hungry, anybody who's needy. Doesn't matter if they're crippled, if they're poor. It doesn't matter where they're from, if they're living in houses or living in the corner of the street. Bring them into this fancy meal. And this is for Jesus a picture of the work of the church, that there will be people who reject our message. There will be people who come up with bad excuses, who don't want to participate. And that is not like a hall pass for the church to quit, but we are to go to anyone and to everyone and to bring them closer to God, because God will not allow empty seats at his table. He wants a full house. His grace is abundant and is not limited just to the people who happen to have time to show up. His grace covers everyone who's hungry for and eager for it. Mm-hmm. And we're supposed to share that with the world.
Yeah, that's really good. You and I were talking briefly before this started, and just the point of there being a primary reason, these primary people that we think the story's about, message we're supposed to understand, but really there's this secondary kind of underlying message that's even better or more powerful, I guess.
Yeah, in the parables, we see this recurring theme where Jesus sets the Pharisees, or these teachers of the law, these religious snobs, kind of as the foil of the story. So in a different parable, a parable called the prodigal son, lots of people remember that there's this boy who's wasted all of his wealth, and he comes home in rags, and his father accepts him back. And so our focus and sort of the spotlight shines on the hug the father gives this son. But I think that Jesus' bigger point is that off to the side is an older son who thinks that this son who's returned doesn't deserve to be forgiven, doesn't deserve to be reconciled. There's a story of a good Samaritan, and the Samaritan was someone who was kind of the natural-born enemy of the Jewish people. And this man who is Jewish gets beaten up, and two people who should help him, a priest and a Levite, who's like a Pharisee, or rather like a pastor and a deacon, and they refuse to help this man, but the Samaritan, who's the man's enemy, helps him. Well, Jesus is talking about it's good to help your enemies and to love people who don't love you back. But there's also this dig on the people who are supposed to help, and they crossed the other side of the road and would not help. And here in this story too, I think that Jesus has for us in mind to look at those people who make bad excuses, who know what they need to know about God's love, and they just say, I don't need it. I got other priorities. I got other plans. I just have commitments that are more important to me than being close to God. And God says, okay, we're going to move on then to everyone who is hungry, who's desperate, who's impoverished spiritually and material, and bring them in instead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that, because when we read the Bible and we get into it more, you're always enlightened to new pieces as you read. And this is really good for us. On all these stories, we sort of relate to one part of it or not. We think, am I being the parent who's not accepting my child who's kind of screwing up? Mm-hmm. Or then you think, am I the child that is the mess up, Yeah. But just really applying all this to our lives. And our main lesson today is inclusion.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's okay. I think that these parables have kind of wide roads, and you can choose a lane and live in it. But make no mistake about it. There's always a foil. There's always someone who Jesus sets as sort of, don't be like this person.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, that's the religious honchos of the time, and Jesus is kind of just taking a dig at them in many of these parables.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, we are done. I hope this was a little call for all of us to, include people, bring them to our churches, tell our stories, share the word with them, and we'll see y'all next week.
All right.